Right, so of course James is where we are, and James chapter 1. Amazingly, we're still in James 1, but there does seem to be rather a lot in it. James 1, and I'm going to start at verse 22. So there's a bit of a sort of crossover. We'll start reading from James 22 and go right through to the end of that chapter then, so through to verse 27, and I'll start, and if we just take a verse each and go that way around. So Rachel, you'll be after me. James 1 verse 22. But be ye doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving your own selves.
For if any are hearers of the word and not doers, they are like those who look at themselves in a mirror.
For he observes himself and goes away, and at once forgets what he was like.
But whoso looketh into the perfect law of liberty, and continueth therein, he being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this man shall be blessed in his deed.
If anyone among you thinks he is religious, and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this one's religion is useless.
Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and to keep himself unspotted from the world.
Yes, thank you. So, verse 22, which I think we kind of might have touched on last time, be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving your own selves. And then he gives an illustration of what someone who's a hearer of the word but not a doer is like, and he says it's like someone looking into a mirror, or beholding his natural face in a glass, it says here. So it's like a man that looks at it in a mirror, he sees his own reflection, and then he goes away and forgets what he's seen. And then that's compared with somebody who is hearing the word and doing the word, and that is like somebody who's looking into the words he uses here are the perfect law of liberty. And I'm going to just throw that open straight away, really, just to hear. I think it'd be interesting to hear people's comments. What is the perfect law of liberty that James is speaking of? Anybody got any thoughts on that? What you know? He's looking into it, and if he continues therein, not being a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, then it says this man shall be blessed in his deed. So what is this thing that he's looking into? This perfect law of liberty. Any takers?
Well, I can just to start off, we're called to be free.
Mm-hmm.
Liberty is freedom.
Yes.
And when I think of freedom in the New Testament, I don't think of a liberty to do what I want, but freedom from sin. That's the liberty that I tend to think of. So I don't know whether it's got anything to do with that.
Yeah. I think it's a really good point, because of course a lot of people, you speak to the people in the world about freedom, and they equate freedom with being without law. You know, a lot of people will say, well, if there's no constraints on me, then I'm free, aren't I? You know, if there's no commandments or laws put upon me, then that makes me free. But the Bible makes it clear that without the commandments of God, that the person isn't free, because he who commits sin, and the Bible says lawlessness is sin, that without those laws, you're not free. You're a slave or a servant to sin. So that's the irony, that the more you throw off the constraints of God's commandments, the less free you actually are. You become in bondage. And so yes, I think there is a sense in which it's talking about that. Any other thoughts on that?
I've lost it now. It may
Lost it in general, or
hopefully not now. 1 Corinthians 9.
Yeah.
It just reminds me where because obviously we're not under the law, we're under grace.
Mhm.
But and it says in Galatians, doesn't it? It was, I can't remember how it is in the King James. I've got that verse in a different version in my mind, but it says something like it was for freedom
Christ has set us
Christ
free.
set us free, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But in 1 Corinthians 9 verse 21 it says, 20, and unto the Jews I became as a Jew that I might gain the Jews, to them that are under the law as under the law, that I might gain them that are under the law, to them that are without law as without law. And then he kind of gives this bit, which I think is really interesting, where he says, being not without law to God, but under the law to Christ.
Mhm.
So he's almost kind of saying, we're not without the law, we're not under the law, we're under grace, but we're still
Not without law.
Not without law,
Yeah.
yeah, because we're under the law to Christ.
Mm.
So if we've got that freedom in Christ, it's freedom under the law to Christ.
Yes.
So it reminds me of that.
No,
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. Sorry, you were going to say?
No, absolutely. I mean, Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law,
Yes.
and it sounds paradoxical, doesn't it, to say that you're under a law of liberty,
Mm.
doesn't it? Because
It
it's
does.
like it's contradictory, isn't it? How can you be
It
free and yet under
seems
the
so.
law? It seems that's right.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't know, but I would go with what Paul's saying here. It's sort of it's something to do with the law of Christ.
Yeah, I would agree entirely, yeah. That's how I would phrase it.
I think the other thing is as well that, being under the law, I can't remember exactly how to phrase it now, I've turned back, but being under the law to Christ, it's like, God writes his law on our hearts,
Oh yes.
So we're a doer of the law because we want to do it, because that's what he's given us, that desire, not because, you're not looking into that law and thinking that's something I've got to do, are you?
No, it's not out of duty.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things that come to my mind from what you've both said. Matthew's talking about having liberty, not being under sin, and so on. It's in Romans 8, I think it is, where it talks about, that the law of the Spirit of life has set me free from the law of sin and death. Do you know that one?
Yeah.
And but also the one I'm really thinking of is, when Jesus says, the commandment that Jesus gives is that you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul and strength, and love your neighbour as yourself.
Yeah.
He says all the law and the prophets hang
Yes.
on this one commandment, Matthew 22.
Yes.
I think that is the perfect law of liberty. If you were going to sum it up,
Yes.
as a whole, is to love the Lord your God with everything that you are.
Well, I think James talks about that, doesn't he? He
Yeah,
talks
the
about
royal law.
the royal or the kingly law, the royal law,
Yeah.
and I think does he talk about that somewhere?
Yes, he
Chapter
does.
2,
Yeah.
Chapter 2,
yeah.
verse 8.
Yeah. So I think that's, and again, this is just illustrative of what I was saying before about he comes and goes on some of these subjects. You'll see later on in this chapter here, before we end it, he's going back to some points he made earlier on. So yeah, there is a sense in which he kind of like skips backwards and forwards on some of these points.